Hi, I'm Thomas, and welcome back to the Basilisk Keep. In today's episode, as the title indicates, we will be going over the project, the picture, and the plan. So what do I mean by that? For the project, I'll give a quick overview. This project is a custom Mandalorian. That is to say, an original character that fits into the canon of Star Wars, but is not part of the canon. So, my guy, Fen Zatan, that's what I named him, is not a Din Djarin, Bo-Katan, Boba Fett title character. He is a manifestation of me in universe. And there's actually a whole list of aesthetic rules that people have developed for what a Mandalorian needs to look like. Probably the best example of these rules comes from the Mando Mercs Costuming Club, or MMCC for short. They do a lot of charity events, and they get together in groups of cosplayers called troops. And they go out to conventions, they go to hospitals. Basically, they're trying to be very altruistic. I don't have a whole lot of friends who are making Mandalorian costumes. In fact, one, and it's probably going to be a little while for him. So I'm not worried about joining the MMCC, but their aesthetics rules are relevant to the project. So that's a little bit about what we're going to be doing. This will take probably about 1.5 years of monthly episodes to get through all the different parts of building your own Mandalorian costume. In today's episode, we're going to continue on with the picture and the plan. For the picture, you'll see probably the first 2/3 of this video are dedicated to my process for sketching a concept sketch and then importing that into a computer software such as Photoshop, and using Photoshop to really flesh it out, bring it to life, add in all the colors, add in all the scratches and dirt. And then the last third of the video will be dedicated to how to plan. So there's a software that I like to use for planning projects that are this big. And there's a couple other methods that you can use, and I'll get into later. Generally, how do you eat an elephant? Or let me make this topical. How do you eat a bantha? One bite at a time. So let's get into it with the concept sketch. All right, so I began by sketching some thumbnails of different poses that I might want the concept sketch to have. It started with your super basic hands on hips, standing straight. Then I wanted to try something more dynamic. Here he's got his gun hand sticking out, and he's got the shield on his bracer, and he's sort of hanging back a little bit. Wasn't 100% sure that's what I wanted to go with, so I kept going on and tried something where he's kneeling and shooting. I like it. I'm not sure it's what I want to go with. So now we're going to try yet another pose. I like that second one, so let's go a little more nonchalant. Another fairly relaxed one. Looking over his shoulder. So, now I'm going to look at these 4, decide which one I want to keep, and iterate on some more. And obviously it's going to be that upper right one. it just feels the most dynamic out of all these. So let's put a tick there and then move on to some more sketches. Trying to sketch a perspective plane, I don't know that it actually helped my process. So this, again, a little bit of an iteration. This one's a little more relaxed, standing upright. Arm is out instead of in. Another one, this one a little more dynamic. What I'm trying to go for is he's leaning into the shot. I think I pulled it off okay, but I'm still not 100% sure on that. Do some more. This, he's sort of backing away from the enemy. I feel like the pose is a little less dynamic than what I'm going for. So I cross that out. I'm gonna try one more on this page, and then we'll move on to do something else. For this pose, he's actually been thrown backwards by an explosion or something. I think that this would be a fantastic sketch pose if I was going for a Mandalorian with a jetpack. Very dynamic, lots of implied motion, but it just doesn't fit the character in its current configuration. So I want to do a couple more iterations. I think I can get this a little more dynamic, and we'll see what's going on. The stance of the legs just felt a little bit weak here. Try one more. I think this might be the last one. Gotta get the proportions right. Well, you don't have to, but it helps. So this one, again, just fairly relaxed, not super inspired. I kind of went for the one on the left. It felt more dynamic. But as we'll see in a minute, I later decided that we'll just go for that first one that I really liked. So these are just the pose thumbnails from the previous part of this. I went back through these and decided, yeah, I'm just going to go with that first one that I really liked. And so we'll cross that out and make sure I'm going with the one I like. It's a little less dynamic than I would want, but it just feels the most reasonable and realistic. So for this sketch, I'm going to use my 0.9 millimeter lead mechanical pencil. It's got a really just large eraser. This is the 0.5 millimeter lead pencil that I was using for the thumbnails. And it's just got a tiny, tiny eraser. Great for detail. But if you're trying to take out a lot of mistakes all at once, the bigger one is nice. So I'll begin this much the same way as the thumbnail sketches. You know, drawing in a rough skeleton and all that. And it doesn't have to be perfect here. All I'm going for is the overall gesture, make sure that the proportions are correct. And this is going to be what I call a 2D mannequin. This is going to inform where I draw the armor pieces, where I draw the flight suit of the character. And, you know, this is just like putting clothes on a real mannequin at a department store. In this segment, I'm just opening up the helmet file. This could be any of the armor files. I've already done that. Use your modeling tool of choice. I like to use Fusion 360. It's a good parametric-based modeling software. Blender is also good for vertex-based. So this is my custom helmet, taking a screenshot on Windows. That's just the Windows key, Shift S. Open it up. Make sure to turn on perspective view and get the perspective that you want. Make sure to save the screenshot so that you can import it as a photo file into Photoshop later. This is where the fun begins. So I've imported my 2D mannequin into Photoshop. I didn't like the proportion of the arms and shoulders. It was just too big, sort of ape-like. So I went ahead and copied the sketch just in Photoshop. Just use my pen stylus. You don't have to have a stylus, though for any sort of digital drawing, it really helps. And you could do this on a smart device if you have the right software. I don't recommend buying Photoshop if you're only going to do this once or twice a year, but I like to have it on hand for drawing concept sketches or doing thumbnails for content. It's good to have. Besides, I also have the other Adobe products that I need. So there's still problems with the sketch, the outline sketch that I drew here. For example, the hands and feet are too small. But the rest of it should be pretty good to go off. Now I have a screenshot that I took of basically the top of the flight suit. And there's some important seams here, like the secondary sleeves, that I really want to make sure are captured in my drawing. Great thing about Photoshop is layers. So I'm drawing this flight suit on a separate layer from the red sketch. And then when I'm done with all this, later I can go back and just turn off that sketch layer and I don't have to look at it anymore. The drawing of, so here's the trousers for the flight suit. It's a similar thing. There's some seams and patches that I want to make sure are captured. The lines that I'm drawing here for the flight suit and then later for the armor, those will be present in the final rendering. So I want to make sure that these are a little bit cleaner than the sketch lines. So as talked about earlier, I took screenshots of all the major armor pieces and the positions that roughly that I want them to be in. As you notice, for that right greave at the bottom, it wasn't quite the right perspective, so I just took the perspective warp tool native to Photoshop and tweaked it a little bit, make it look more like it's on the leg. For the helmet, as you probably noticed in the previous section, I don't have ear caps designed yet. This is my own custom design. It'll be out next year sometime for sale, but for now, it's just mine. The rest of this armor is all by a creator who goes by the name Maker Baked. That's an E, or sorry, that's a 3 instead of a E at the end of the name. He's got a really distinct style, and some of, not his older work, not his newer work, some of his middle work, I really appreciate the aesthetic of. So I'm using his gunny armor for the legs, for the groin area, and then I'm using his unifier chest plate and accompanying shoulder plate and back plate. So I'm just getting the major lines on these pieces of armor. Just trying to make sure that all the major things are captured, and those lines will show up later in the process. So I've been working on the armor here, and now I want to make sure that I've drawn the flak vest. The flak vest is part of a Mandalorian's clothing that in universe would be used to catch small pieces of shrapnel, otherwise known as flak. For sake of costuming, it's really a convenient way to mount the chest plate and the shoulders to the costume, because most of the other armor can be held on with a belt or with just gravity because it clips around you. But this kind of needs something to hang on. So now what I'm doing is, if you noticed a moment ago, all those lines were overlapping. It's kind of cluttered. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the lasso tool and I am capturing the outlines of each of these armor pieces in a separate layer underneath the drawing layer. And I'm just filling those with white. That'll change in a moment when I start to add color. But now you can see that white is blocking out everything that's below it. So we're not getting super cluttered lines. So I'll just go through and replace all the white with gray. That'll represent the Beskar armor. On the flak vest, I replaced it with brown because I'm using brown fabric. I think khaki or camel technically, but semantics. Using the lasso tool can be really fast, but it can also be a little bit frustrating trying to get all the little tiny edges. We're going to go with charcoal gray on the flight suit, and then the funny shape around the face, that's just going to be a balaclava. I have a mustache, so my guy's got a mustache. My boots and gloves will be brown. I'm thinking I'm going to purchase gloves, but the boots, those are just a pair of work boots that I have worn for 3 years now. And because they're work boots, they have very naturally acquired weathering. I don't have to simulate that. I've also got some mustard yellow fabric tape that I'm going to sew down to the sleeves. That's going to add some detail. And then some black tape that's going to go around the edge of the flak vest just to bind it all together. So now I'm going to draw in the belt. I forgot about this a minute ago because I don't have reference for the belt. I just have what's going on in my mind. Now I'm going into painting the helmet. There has been a lot of color testing between what we just skipped from and now. I was on a conference call with my friend Ed at a Dragon's Playthings, and we were discussing the color scheme for my Mandalorian. This is sort of the color scheme I've been wanting to go with for years now, but he had some pointers on where the colors should go based on what's in the canon. So I'm using the same lasso process to just block out the colors. Anything that is on a layer above will be showing. Anything that's on a layer below that is blocked out by a layer above will be blocked. So that's why I'm able to just do really crude lines around some of these spots. I've got some 2D graphics that I want to paint onto the shoulders, mythosaur skull, and then on the left shoulder we've got a wing. That's just my own design. I don't really have a name for it. Here I'm testing out which chest stripes I want to use. I think in keeping with the stripes on the helmet, I'm just going to go with the left of the chest. There would be some red on the thighs, or the thigh, and the lower of the left leg, but because it's kind of out of view of the camera, if you will, I'm not bothering with that here. So just adding color where I think color's supposed to go. And then what I do after that is I make sure all the layers of paint are all 100% opacity. I merge them so any overlaps are taken care of. And then I turn that merge layer to 70%. And then you see the lines show through. Here I'm just adding all sorts of grunge and scratches, using custom brushes for that. Because making it feel lived in is good. Then I used a layer mask on the paint layers that I just merged. And using that, I'm able to paint in scratch marks. So I'm using a positive brush to paint in scratch marks, and then the layer mask just takes those away. Here I'm again using the lasso method to add shading. I decided that for this particular concept sketch, and probably most of them going forward, I wanted to use basically cell shading. Think of some Nintendo games. So black and white. And here's the final product. Got a background, got some shadow, drew a blaster. Yeah. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how I like to keep track of projects and how I like to plan for them. So this right here is a web app called ClickUp. There are others like it, such as Asana, which is a paid program. You can also do this in Excel if you have the patience for that. I don't. So I'm using ClickUp. You can also use physical media, but I am a digital native. I grew up on Windows 98, XP, even Vista 7, 8, and now I'm on 10. So I like to have a file structure when I'm organizing more abstract thoughts. Otherwise, I like to think in pictures and video, but that doesn't really work too well when you're trying to organize an entire year-long project. So one option that is really good is called a Gantt chart. As you can see at the top here, it has dates laid out, and then it's got my projects. You might notice a little gray arrow that goes from the end of chapter 1 to the beginning of finished build. That is an indication that finished build is dependent on chapter 1. I am not, according to the program, I am not allowed to finish the build until I have finished chapter 1. And then you can see all these stair steps of all the different chapters. That is just another indication, another visual indication that these are linked up. So I need to finish one before I go to the next. And there's a little more complication on my end than you might have for yours. And that mostly comes down to I'm filming and I'm recording and I am editing all this together. You obviously won't have to do that unless you're making a YouTube channel as well. But here we can break it down into subtasks. So if I open up chapter 1, then I can see, well, first I want to do a thumbnail sketch of the poses, then I want to do a big sketch of the pose, and then I need to import everything into Photoshop, and all of these have to be done sequentially. In many cases, they cannot physically be done one before the other. I cannot draw the entire sketch in Photoshop and then add the armor screenshots. It just doesn't really work that way, you know? So if you want to add a new task, in this case, I'm doing each new episode as a task, then you can click Add Task, and here you'll get a quick preview of what we're going to do next month, which is Chapter 2, the flight suit. So, what goes into building a flight suit? Well, we can add subtasks. If we click on this little arrow next to the task, well, first let's bring it up into order so that everything makes sense. If we click on the little arrow next to the task, then we can add a subtask. And as you can see, I'm floundering around a little bit because this is the first time I've used the program in years. So what is the first subtask to making a fabric flight suit? Well, it's to just make the top, right? We're going to make the top before we make the bottom. That's a little bit vague. So how about we prep the pattern first? Cool, I have the pattern purchased, and I have to just print that out and put it together. And then once I have the pattern, I have to cut the fabric. Okay, cool, we're cooking. Then I need to sew the top. Sew everything together. Yeah, you should probably be a little more specific than this. However, it's been a few weeks since I actually read the pattern instructions, so I can't really go into more detail at the moment. I will in the video that you'll see next month. And we will learn how to sew together because I am by no means professional. So it helps to just sort these into order, the order that you're going to do them in, the order that they actually can be done in. And then if you right click, you can add a dependency. So down in this drop down, there's dependencies. And you can add tasks that the one you clicked on is waiting on, or you can add tasks that it's blocking, or things that it's related to. So what it's related to, I would say everything with making the top it's related to. But for waiting on, cut the fabric is waiting on prep the pattern. Cannot cut the fabric until we prep the pattern. Was it blocking? It's blocking sew everything. You can't sew everything until the fabric's been cut. And you can see how those chain together. And then at the end there, we'll want to say that making the top is dependent on sewing everything. And it's blocking finishing the chapter. I mean, you can't publish a video about making a flight suit if you haven't made the flight suit, right? So we're going to add that dependency. Quick side note, I should also add, and I'll get back to it later on my own off camera, but I should also add washing the fabric. I was only able to find 100% cotton canvas, which has a tendency to shrink the first time you wash it. And I will cover that in more detail in the next episode, but just thought I'd add that in there. So now we can go back into our Gantt chart, look for the project, and it turns out you have to actually put dates on it in order for it to show up in the Gantt chart. You can do that on your own. I'm not going to do that here for sake of time. We can go to the board view. And the convenient thing about this is you can break it down into tasks and then into subtasks. And you can click on each one and say, oh, hey, this is done. This is in progress. But you can also click and drag from one column to another. So here I'm just showing again, these are dependent on each other with the dependencies that we made earlier. So if we look at chapter 1, which is the episode that you're watching now, here's everything that I had to do in order to make this episode. And up to this point in recording, here are the things that I've done. I have drawn the concept sketch, and part of that, I've made the thumbnail sketch poses, the full sheet pose. I've imported everything into Photoshop. I've colored everything. I've added lighting. So all of that's done. And what you can do is instead of saying to do, you can mark those as complete. Or if you're in the middle of something, you can say in progress. I promise I'm not behind. And as you can see, all of these red dates, at the time of filming, I was behind. Word of advice, don't get behind. And if you get behind, catch up real quick, because if you get behind a lot, catching up is hard. Remember what I said in chapter 0. How do you eat a bantha? One bite at a time. These are those singular bites. And we're just trying to make sure that every little bite gets eaten so that we can have the final product. So a minute ago, I mentioned using physical media for tracking your costume. This here is the Cosplay Companion Notebook by Punished Props Academy. I watched one of their YouTube videos recently where they discuss this, and it's really well put together. Has such information as contact, everything that you need to pack. It's got a handy little ruler, repair kit, and all sorts of other things. There's a checklist for things that you need to make. It gives examples of what your goals should be. Like, you make your own goals depending on where you want to grow in your costume making journey. And then it has all sorts of gender neutral, what I call 2D mannequins, where you can start to plan out your costume. And as you can see, I never really finished. But then in the back, you can take down notes, things that you learned along the way, budgeting. It's not laid out like a Gantt chart, obviously, but it's got all the dates and what you plan to work on, what you actually work on. And then you can say how many hours you worked in the end. So what I see this as is more of an as-you-go tool, whereas the Gantt chart that I discussed is more of a planning tool. I think that this is a fantastic resource. It doesn't work very well for me personally, but it might work for you, and that's why I brought it up. All right, so this has been chapter 1 of this Mandalorian project. This has been a little bit of a longer video than I intend to usually put out. This obviously has reached the 30-minute mark. I intend to keep these a little more consumable, closer to 20 to 25 minutes per episode. One thing that I wanted to call out but forgot to in drawing the flight suit is the flight suit pattern is by a maker on Etsy that goes by the name Rogue One Cosplay. And I will list their link as well as the link for all the maker baked armor, and in the future links for any products that I use, or that I make rather. I'll put those in the description, and that way you can just go right to these makers and support them if you like their work. I really think it's a good thing to do. So, all that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode. And if you think you'll like the project and want to follow along, then I would implore you to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe in the comments, tell me what project you're working on. I would love to be able to follow along with other makers through this journey. You know, trips are more fun when you go with friends. So, as always, thank you for watching. Good luck. Don't die. We're all counting on you.